Hey, and welcome to the Anatomy and Physiology screencasts. In each one of these screencasts, we're going to talk about a few of your organ systems, and the first one we'll talk about will be the nervous and the endocrine system. It's how organ systems communicate, and it's how you maintain homeostasis. I mean, each one of these organ systems are important, right? You can't say like the nervous system is more important than the digestive system. You can't say the digestive system is more important than the circulatory and the immune system. They all have their own role, and each one of them are essential to maintaining homeostasis, which again was something that we covered fall semester. Homeostasis is your body's way of regulating its internal environment. So things like temperature, you can't get too hot or too cold, thirst, hunger, pain signals. So it's important that these organ systems prevent you from dying, basically. So this one is a discussion between the nervous and the endocrine system. The nervous system is made up of your brain and your spinal cord and your peripheral nervous system, which are all the nerves that connect to your outer limbs and your organs. Okay, so you have your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and then your peripherals. So this is more hardwired and it's fast acting. Okay, you can generate electrical impulses. They're carried across something called neurons. We'll explain its structure in just a little bit, but neurons transmit these signals extremely fast. This is almost instantaneous how your central nervous system acts. So for example, you can wiggle your finger or your big toe on command and it happens instantaneously. Okay, whereas on the other hand, you have your endocrine system, which regulates metabolism and growth, and it's carried out by a lot of different organs in your body. So this is slower acting. The chemicals and the hormones are carried out by, or they're delivered by your bloodstream. Both systems, the central nervous system and your endocrine system, both allow you to respond to stimuli. So a stimulus is something that causes a response, and the changes can be chemical, cellular, or you can learn it. It becomes behavioral. So an example of the central nervous system would be like if you accidentally touch like a hot stove or hot surface, a hot plate, whatever. Your hand is going to jolt and it's going to pull away before it even realizes, before your brain even processes what actually happened, like what hit you. So you pull your hand away without even realizing it's a stove. It's a hot stove top. So that's what the central nervous system can do. You can register pain before realizing what it actually is, what the threat might be. And remember, it's hardwired and it's fast acting. So it's different from the endocrine system, which again is you have different hormones that are secreted by organs in your body, and then it's delivered by the bloodstream. So things like growth hormones, things that regulate metabolism, and even sleep cycles. Those are all determined by the endocrine system. All right, so just to give you a better picture of what the peripheral nervous system is, again, you have your brain and your spinal cord, which is your central nervous system. The peripherals are all these little nerves here that connect to, again, your peripherals, which are like your outer limbs or your internal organs. And your brain, your whole entire nervous system is made up of things called neurons. These are the building blocks, and this is a picture of what a neuron looks like. Okay, you have this blob right here with a nucleus, and then you have something called dendrites which come off, and these conduct electrical signals, and then they travel down an axon. Okay, and they're insulated by something called myelin sheath. I would imagine these are made up of like fatty and like protein deposits. And then at the end of your neuron, you have something called axon terminals, and if you zoom in, you can actually see that your neuron conducts an electrical signal. It travels down the length of this axon, and at the very end, it becomes a chemical signal that travels across a gap. And then you have to imagine that there's a bunch of these neurons that are connected almost like dominoes. It's like a domino effect, and that's how a signal is carried across your body from your brain to, like, for example, your big toe. Okay, or it could even be the end of something where finally you have your chemical signal release some sort of neurotransmitter across this gap, and then it's received by a receptor, which then takes in that neurotransmitter, and then it delivers the message to the rest of your body somehow. Okay, so let's check out some other pictures here. Okay, this is how an electrical signal runs down the length of a neuron. Okay, and then you have these axons here, okay, which is like a tail that comes off of your neuron. And then look at how it's insulated. Okay, this is almost like if you take like an electrical cord, it would be like the rubber like sheathing on the outside of it. So it allows the electrical signal to be insulated and to travel more efficiently. And what it can actually do is it jumps from, these are called nodes of Ranvier. Okay, so instead of traveling across the axon, it can actually just jump across like this really fast. Okay, so again, that's why your nervous system is faster acting, and it acts upon electrical impulses. Okay, you can again send a signal from your brain to your big toe almost on command, and it's done, and it's carried by these neurons. Now, at the end of your neuron, okay, let's go back to this picture here. So have this picture in mind. And now I want to go back to this one here. Okay, you're really looking at this here. You see where I have my cursor? Okay, that's what we're zoomed into. So that would be the axon terminal. And at the end of the axon terminal, you have well, these are carried by vesicles, okay, which we discussed in fall semester with like cell organelles. These will carry neurotransmitters, which are chemical signals, and they jump across this little gap. It's called a synapse, and they'll be received by receptors, or maybe they're dendrites. Okay, and this is how the signal then propagates. Okay, so it's a repeating process. It's like a domino effect. You push one domino, the next one falls. Okay, so again, we're not talking about just one neuron. We're talking about billions of these. Okay, where they're all interconnected. So at the end of an axon terminal, you have another dendrite which receives the signal. So now we'll talk about your senses. Okay, we have 5 senses. We have touch, sight, sound, taste, and smell. And these help you maintain homeostasis. Your visual system, here's a cutaway view of your eyeball. And there's a lot of different parts. Okay, you have a cornea, which is the outer layer. Your iris and your pupil, which I would assume is their muscles that contract or relax to allow more light to pass through. And then your lens, which then refract the light to the back of your eyeball, or it's a layer in your eyeball called the retina. And your retina contains a lot of these types of cells called rods and cones. Rods help you interpret objects, shapes, and cones are types of cells that allow you to make sense of different wavelengths of light and their color. Okay, so long story short, okay, what happens is the light gets bent twice. So then when your retina receives the signal, it's actually upside down, and then that signal is carried across by impulses, again, like neurons, like how we discussed, through your optic nerve, and this would travel to the back of your brain. Probably the occipital lobe, which we'll discuss in a little bit. And then your brain flips the image right side up. So then that's how you see the world right side up. And that's because of how your brain interprets that signal. Okay, so your eyes are just one big fancy organ, or actually you have a pair of them, that interprets light, and then it sends a signal to your brain, and then your brain makes sense of all the light that's being bounced across different objects in the world. Now, for hearing, okay, your hearing, we have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. So those 3 sections, okay? So then you have your earlobe, which is an acoustic system that helps amplify sounds before it gets there. Then it travels down your ear canal. before it hits something called the eardrum, okay, or the tympanic membrane. And then there are 3 small bones, okay, so there's a vibration, and it travels across something called the hammer first, and then the anvil and the stirrup. But in other resources or textbooks, they're going to call this the malleus. This will be called the incus, and then this is called the stapes. So then they travel down this the sound signal is transmitted by these small bones here. It vibrates. It then goes through the cochlea, okay, which has tiny little things called hair cells, and they vibrate. And then finally, the acoustic signal is then sent down your cochlear nerve, okay, and then it travels to your brain, and then your brain makes sense of the sound that you're hearing in the outside world. Now, for smell and for taste, okay, these are kind of interrelated, okay, because like your nose and like your throat, those are all connected, those membranes. So when you're smelling something, what happens is the gas is breathed in through your nose, and then it dissolves. The chemicals dissolved in your olfactory nerves, right? Olfactory glands, and then it travels to the nerve fibers, okay, and then your brain then interprets that signal as a smell of some sort. And pretty much the same thing occurs in taste. So when you taste food, when food starts to dissolve on your tongue, small chemicals are dissolved on your taste buds, okay, and there's like different areas of your tongue. So like the back of your tongue here, you would interpret bitter taste, sour on the edges here, salty on the front, and then salty and sweet here on the tip of your tongue. Okay, so again, you have these chemoreceptors that detect molecules that are dissolved in liquid, and then those signals are then sent down through nerves, and then your brain makes sense of it. And we also can't forget about touch, temperature, and pain. So you have your integumentary system, which is your skin. Okay, so your skin is the biggest organ in your body. It probably weighs the most. It covers your whole entire body. And here is a cutaway view of all the different layers of skin. You have your epidermis, okay, it's the outermost layer. Then you have your dermis, which is the subcutaneous. It contains like all the fats and stuff here, and tissues and other organs, or not organs, sorry, but receptors underneath. Okay, so for touch, you have 2 different types. You have mechanoreceptors, which are light and heavy pressures. So when you sense like an itch or like a scratch or something, that's light touch. And then you also have like a heavy touch, which are found here. And this, interprets the signal as, being pressed upon or being slapped or being squeezed, right? So these receptors here are stimulated by stronger touch. These near the surface are more sensitive. Now, temperature and pain are sensed by thermoreceptors and pain receptors. Okay, so thermo would be hot or cold. Okay, so look at these receptors here. You have cold receptors, and then you also have heat receptors. Now, an interesting thing is you can actually put your hand in cold water first, so then it kind of numbs it, and then put it underneath hot water, and the sensation is numbed, okay, because both of these receptors are being stimulated, so your brain gets confused for a second, and then it can't really interpret the difference between hot and cold. So maybe try that at home. Run your hand under cold water for like a minute or 2, okay, until it gets numb, and then put it under warm water, and then it's really hard to interpret the difference between the 2 signals, okay, because both of these receptors are being stimulated. And then pain would be at the surface here, so when you feel pain, I think that's a good thing to get away from, right? So let's say you hit like a sharp object, I would assume that, again, the pain signal is being received by these receptors here, as well as like light touch, and then it causes your hand or the part of the skin feeling pain to pull away. All right, now we can describe the structure of the brain as well as its function and how it works. So the central nervous system, again, it processes information. I brought back this picture specifically for that, so then we can talk about its structure. So here is a neuron again. Okay, you have the cell body, okay, which contains the dendrites and the nucleus. It's this big cluster here, and then the axon, which would be like the tail ending into the axon terminal. Okay, so your brain is consisted of the cell bodies, which are clustered together on the outside, and this is called gray matter. This is the outer layer of your brain, and then all the axons are pointed inwards. Okay, so they're pointed on the inside. This is called white matter. And the brain has 100 billion neurons, okay, a bunch of them, and they're protected by 3 layers of tissue. Okay, they're called meninges. You have again your skin here and your skull, and then finally you have those layers of the brain. Okay, this is a cross section of the skull and the meninges together. So again, you have your dura mater, your subarachnoid space. Okay, this is like spongy tissue, and then you have your cerebral, which is the brain itself. Okay, and then you can see here in the cross section there's like blood vessels that connect veins and arteries, which deliver blood and oxygen to your brain. Okay, so the brain has 3 main structures. You have your cerebrum, which is the main part of the brain. It's the big mass right there that you see. You have your cerebellum, which is the tiny brain that's below it, and then you also have the brain stem, which has the pons and the medulla, and then the terminal would be the spinal cord. So this goes down the length of your spine, and it transmits signals through peripheral nerves. Okay, and so the brain has 2 hemispheres. It's got a right and a left hemisphere, and what's interesting is the left hemisphere of your brain controls all the functions on the right side of your body, and then the left hemisphere of your brain controls all the functions on the left side of your body. Okay, so hemispheres control the opposite side of the body, basically. Your cerebellum coordinates all the movements of your body, so like your muscular function, and the brainstem controls things like breathing and heartbeat. Okay, and so if any of these parts are severed, then you're in for some trouble. Okay, your spinal cord, okay, is made up of the vertebrae, the fluid that surrounds it, the meninges, and the spinal cord. Okay, and this connects the brain to the nerves throughout your body. I wonder if I skipped over something. I did, yeah. So again, so 2 hemispheres, okay, and each hemisphere is divided into different lobes here. So you have your parietal lobe, your frontal lobe. This is the front of the brain, okay, and so your eyes would be like seated like here somewhere, okay, and then you have your temporal lobe, and then your occipital lobe, which is the back of the brain. Okay, so each one of these lobes is responsible for something different. Okay, so for example, your frontal lobe is responsible for like your personality and like your reasoning and your behavior. Okay, and there's a case study of someone called I believe his name was Phineas Gage. He was a railway worker, and he was packing like gunpowder to be used as explosives to blow up like a hillside or something, so then his team could keep laying tracks. Well, the gunpowder went off, and he was tamping gunpowder into the spike. Okay, and the spike blew up, and it flew past, or flew through his skin, severed his left eye, and then it traveled out of his the upper portion of his frontal lobe here, so it left a little gash in his brain. Miraculously, he survived, but people noticed a change in his behavior, and Phineas was always well behaved. He was responsible, conscientious, and a team player, but after his injury, he had, drunken ways. He was sexually uninhibited, So I would think he went around grabbing women, things of that nature, just, drunken behavior, and just overall, a tragedy for him. Because it changed his personality just by losing a piece of his brain, basically. Now it's time for a discussion on the peripheral nervous system. This is how the signals which are generated by your brain and your spinal cord are then carried out to your outer limbs and your muscles. So the peripheral nervous system includes 12 pairs of nerves in your head, and then 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And again, these are made up of like sensory and motor neurons, okay, which is how signals are quickly carried across the body. And then it's broken down into somatic, which is voluntary controls. So for example, being able to flex your muscles or wiggle your finger or your toe, those are voluntary control systems, okay, and that's determined by your somatic system. You also have your autonomic system. These are involuntary, okay, you don't have to think about it. For example, like digesting food, you don't have to tell your esophagus to please carry the food down to my stomach. It just does that automatically, okay? And then after that, your stomach then, breaks down the food, and then it delivers it to like the small intestine, and then the small intestine starts absorbing all the nutrients. So those are examples of things that are autonomic. You don't have to think about it. Your body just performs it. And then finally, you have the autonomic system being broken down into both sympathetic, okay, and the parasympathetic systems, and these are in direct contrast to each other. So parasympathetic would be all things that cause your body to relax, okay? So for example, things like digestion can occur when you're relaxed, okay? But on the other hand, when you are frightened, when you're fearful, when there is a traumatic situation going on, you don't feel as hungry, and your body actually inhibits peristalsis, which means the muscles that contract and eventually deliver food down from your esophagus to your stomach, okay? So it inhibits digestion because you have to be relaxed for something like that to happen, okay? Your sympathetic system is also known as your fight or flight, okay? So your pupils will dilate in your eyes, and that allows more light to come in, and that allows you to have sharper senses, basically. You have more acute vision, basically because of the adrenaline that triggers your eyes to dilate, okay? And your heartbeat is faster, which pumps more blood throughout your body. More blood means more oxygen. You start to secrete more adrenaline in your adrenal glands. These are small glands that rest above your kidneys. And basically all these things here allow you to get out of a scary situation, okay? You see a wild bear or a tiger or a lion, and it's staring at you. Your heartbeat's going to race. Your bronchi is going to dilate, allowing you to get more air into your lungs. So this is called the autonomic sympathetic system, otherwise known as fight or flight. Finally, we'll just briefly talk about the endocrine system and the 7 major glands. Okay, so one of the first glands would be the hypothalamus. This is like found somewhere in the middle section towards the lower end of your brain, and this makes like hormones, like growth hormones. Okay, and this will then stimulate the pituitary gland, which is like a bean-like section of your brain, and the hypothalamus communicates directly to the pituitary gland here through the pituitary stalk, and it will then stimulate the gland itself to produce hormones, growth hormones, metabolism, things like that. Okay, so again, here's a different picture or diagram of what these two glands look like. Okay, and all their structure is probably not too important, just understand what they do. Okay, and that is to regulate growth and metabolism. Same thing with the thyroid gland. Okay, so somewhere in your throat, probably below your Adam's apple, is the thyroid. So the thyroid is a gland that, again, it does pretty much the same thing as the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, just regulates metabolism and growth. It's going to be a common theme for a lot of these glands here, and they have overlap. They kind of do the same thing. The thymus, this is for your immune system, so this is in your chest, okay, above your heart, and this causes white blood cells to mature. So then the white blood cells can then go around your body and then detect pathogens and things like that, and then help fight off infection. Your adrenal glands, which sit above your kidneys here, your kidneys are actually a part of your excretory system, which we'll describe in a later screencast. But the adrenal glands are these organs that sit above the kidneys, and they secrete a hormone called adrenaline, or sometimes it's called epinephrine, and it controls the fight or flight response in the sympathetic system that we described earlier. The pancreas makes digestive enzymes. It also makes insulin, which helps absorb sugar from your blood. Okay, so again, digestion, metabolism, and growth, right? These are the main themes of your organs that control your endocrine system. Okay, and finally you have the testes in males and the ovaries in women, which produce sexual hormones. So for example, the male body produces testosterone, which gives you male characteristics such as a broad jaw, facial hair. You can build muscles much more easily. And they're controlled by your testes. So an interesting fact is never take steroids when you're training at the gym. I know you guys want those fast gains, but it's just not worth it because it overloads your body with testosterone. And then your body is like, hey, I no longer need my testes to produce testosterone. So then your testes will shrink as a result of taking steroid injections because your body's been overwhelmed by an influx of testosterone, and then your body's like, I no longer need my natural organs. So those are the repercussions of taking steroids. Okay, and then just understand the hypothalamus interacts with the nervous system and the endocrine system. Okay, because it's seated in your brain, it can both trigger your central nervous system to carry out an action, and then it also tells the pituitary gland to produce hormones that are used in growth and metabolism.